happy to be available as you read the material and as any questions.
Welcome to this conversation with Thea Ormerod and Stephen Bygrave as we explore something of what it might mean for Australia to make a journey towards having zero carbon emissions. So Thea, tell me about your work with faith leaders. How do you see faith leaders and faith communities having a role in this big question of how we limit climate change?
I'm very grateful to the faith leaders who have rallied behind our different organised efforts in Canberra and also before the G20. I'm very grateful to you for signing that letter on ARC's behalf, asking for emissions reduction targets of 40% below 1990 levels by 2025. Yes, leaders from the Hindu tradition, Muslim, Anglican, different Christian traditions, Catholic, have come with us to Canberra to speak to members of Parliament, and hopefully those leaders go away more energised, more educated to their own communities and carry the message there.
What do you think is the impact of the Pope's encyclical dealing with human-caused climate change?
Well, I think the encyclical is so strong that it can't help but influence those people who read it, who have an open mind. There will be skeptics and cynics, but I think, the hope that we have is that we can actually make a difference to the public imagination with the support of Pope Francis now.
Yes, we've re-lamped our cathedral here in Melbourne, so all with low-emitting diode lights. So we understand that's a very significant reduction of our electricity use and thus our carbon emissions, and we have an aspiration for St Paul's Cathedral to be a green cathedral. There are some challenges with the heritage aspects of having solar panels and other things, but as we work through those, we think this has been a good step forward.
Would love to see that at a local level in lots of different places. We could, as a Christian network of communities, I guess, do a lot to lower the carbon footprint in Australia. One of the encouraging things, but I hope it's not the only thing that encourages people, is that it is a lot cheaper to be energy efficient. And even putting solar panels on, even though there might be an outlay at the beginning, that does pay itself off. But I think we do it because we know it's the right thing to do, and it's going to have an impact around the world to those people who are suffering the most from climate change, and that's where I think our hearts are as Christians.
And I'd like to turn now to you, Stephen. I think many Australians, if you just look at the evidence of their roofs, where they have solar hot water systems, solar electrical generation, they have a high sense of wanting to embrace renewable energy. At the bigger, I suppose, corporate level, it seems that we don't see those policies or that will translated into policy as much. What are the opportunities we have for industrial scale application of renewable energy technology, and what's its costs and benefits compared to other alternatives?
You're exactly right. In Australia and amongst our houses, we have the greatest penetration of rooftop solar in the world. We've got vast renewable energy sources that we can be tapping, both at the local level, community level, and at the industrial scale level. We've also talked and we've done research about buildings and how every household in Australia can be actually a zero emissions building. At an industrial scale, we've done work that shows that through concentrated solar power technology, pumped storage hydro technology, that we can actually have very large scale renewable energy at the scale of 300, 400 megawatts that can power our electricity grid. And our electricity grid can be based on 100% renewable energy.
It seemed that we had to reduce the renewable energy targets, which was negotiated in the Federal Parliament, downwards because we'd actually lost momentum. We'd lost manufacturing capacity for wind technology and other things. How important is that momentum, that consistent policy framework for achieving the kind of things you're speaking about?
It's incredibly important. The policy consistency, the consistency of politicians and leaders in the community in terms of action on climate change, including renewable energy, etc., is incredibly important. The shift we saw in the last 6 months to water down the renewable energy target is the first downward shift in 20 years of support for renewables, both across all parties in government. We've had bipartisan support for renewable energy for the last 20 years. This is the first backward step.
The criticism's often made that there's a very heavy subsidy on renewable energies, renewable energy sources, and this is fairly inefficient. What's your answer to that, and how does renewable energy compare with other energy sources in terms of the effective subsidisation of it?
The reality is there's not a level playing field for energy sources, and there are subsidies across both fossil fuels and other forms of energy. If there was a level playing field, in other words, there were no subsidies, renewables would outcompete fossil fuels. Bloomberg New Energy Finance Group in Australia and in the US has shown that new wind and new solar is cheaper than new coal and new gas, and that strips away the subsidy story and shows with a level playing field that renewables outcompete coal and gas.
And Thea, just I suppose addressing your own Christian understanding of the moral issues that we're talking about here, how do you put this as on the scale of moral concerns?
I think clearly climate change is a moral issue, and that's where I'm coming from. That's where Pope Francis is coming from, and that's where you came from, I think, in your letter with the Primate of the South African Church. It is about justice towards all those people who are going to be suffering the most and who are suffering the most because of the impacts of climate change. Jesus called us to caring about those who are suffering the most. It's really, now that we know what the science is, there are lots of gospel implications for the way we live our lives.
Well, I'm grateful for my guest today in having a conversation about climate change and what might be the responsibility of faith communities in meeting that challenge. But this is the opportunity, if having heard what you've heard today and you have some views, you'd like to interact on Facebook or on the blog or through Twitter, glad to hear your interaction, especially your insights as to the responsibility and opportunities for faith communities to be part of this discussion and this action.